Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're going to dive in and demystify two of the most foundational and, let's be totally honest here, sometimes incredibly intimidating theories in literary and cultural studies: structuralism and post-structuralism. If you've ever stared blankly at a text for a class and wondered how on earth you're supposed to extract some deeper meaning from it, well, you are in exactly the right place.
So where exactly does meaning actually come from? Is it like buried treasure intentionally hidden by the author for you to dig up? Is it somehow locked magically inside the words themselves? Or do you, the reader, actually bring it to life? Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical riddle. It's literally the core intellectual hook of your entire academic journey in literature and culture. How we answer this one specific question fundamentally changes how we analyze texts, how we view society, and really how we understand reality itself.
Here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, the architecture of meaning. Number 2, anatomy of the sign. Number 3, applying structuralism to trifles. 4, the post-structuralist turn. 5, deconstruction, power and authors. And finally, number 6, the enduring legacy.
All right, jumping right into section 1, the architecture of meaning. Okay, so before we can start building with these theoretical tools in your coursework, we really need to take a step back and trace the historical blueprint of literary theory. Prior to the 1900s, the absolute dominant way to study language was called philology. Basically, scholars traced how languages evolved over time. They assumed there was a direct mimetic relationship between words and the external world, meaning words were kind of seen as magical symbols that directly represented real objects. But then, right between 1906 and 1911, a linguist named Ferdinand de Saussure delivered a series of truly groundbreaking lectures. And actually, fun fact here, Saussure never even published this theory himself. His students had to compile his lecture notes into a book after his death because the ideas were just that revolutionary. He introduced a synchronic approach. This effectively freezes language as a complete system in a single moment of time, rather than tracking its long history. And it was this massive intellectual shift that paved the way for structuralism in the 1960s, and later on, post-structuralism in the 1970s.
Moving right along to section 2, anatomy of the sign.
Okay, this is where the magic of structuralism really begins. Saussure proposed that language is built on what he called the linguistic sign. He defined this as a fundamental, totally inseparable two-part unit of language. Now remember how he said prior to Saussure, people thought words had a natural, almost mystical connection to the physical world? Well, Saussure totally shattered that idea. He argues that the relationship between a word and its meaning is entirely arbitrary and conventional. We only agree on what a word means because of our shared cultural rules. That's it. To explain this, Saussure boldly splits this linguistic sign right down the middle into two distinct halves. On one side, we've got the signifier. This is just the physical sound you make with your mouth, or the actual ink marks on a page. On the other side, we have the signified, which is the mental concept or the idea that instantly pops into your head. So think about the word ball. The actual sound, B-A-L-L, doesn't inherently contain the concept of a round, bouncy object, right? I mean, if you say it to someone who only speaks Japanese, that sound means absolutely nothing to them. We have just culturally agreed to link that specific sound to that specific idea. It is purely 100% conventional.
Now you might be wondering, if the connection is completely arbitrary, how does anything mean anything? Well, Saussure's massive revelation for structuralist thought is that meaning arises from difference. Meaning is never found in a vacuum. The word ball only means ball because it is distinct from hall, or tail, or pipe within the entire system of the English language. It's a system of differential relationships. Basically, you know what something is by understanding what it is not.
So, the really crucial point here is that structuralism distinguishes between two totally different levels of language. First, there's langue, which is the underlying structured system of interrelated linguistic rules. It's the grammar of the system itself. Then there's parole, which refers to the individual specific speech acts that you and I say out loud every single day, which are governed by that overarching system. To make this really concrete, think of a game of chess. Langue is the entire rulebook of chess, how the knight moves, what checkmate actually means. Parole, on the other hand, is the specific move you choose to make in one single game. Structuralists care mostly about langue. They want to shift the focus away from isolated texts or individual expressions, and instead they want to uncover the broader underlying cultural rules that make meaning possible in the first place. And the amazing thing is this linguistic framework didn't stay confined to just language. Brilliant thinkers soon started applying Saussure's blueprint to decode pretty much all human cultural practices. Claude Lévi-Strauss analyzed global myths, breaking them down into these fundamental units he called me-themes. Vladimir Propp looked at Russian fairy tales and realized, wow, they all share a lang of just 31 recurring narrative functions. Tsvetan Todorov proposed an entire narrative grammar for stories, and Jonathan Culler coined this great term literary competence, suggesting that as readers, we actually possess an internalized system of rules that allows us to understand texts without even realizing we're doing it.
Which brings us to Section 3, Applying Structuralism to Trifles.
Now, theory is fantastic, but let's anchor this highly abstract concept by practically applying it to a literary text you might actually encounter in your coursework, Susan Glaspell's famous one-act play, Trifles. Structuralists absolutely love finding binary oppositions. These are pairs of contrasting concepts to reveal a text's underlying matrix of meaning. So in Trifles, which is a play about a murder investigation, we can clearly map out several specific cultural codes. We've got gender roles, contrasting masculine logic against feminine attention to domestic trifles. We have freedom, contrasting the accused Minnie's vibrant past against the suffocating oppression of her husband. And we have justice, contrasting the men's strict legalistic law against the women's moral social solidarity. According to structuralism, the text generates its meaning precisely through the friction between these opposing terms.
And we can connect this theoretical binary table directly to tangible plot points. In the play, the women find a dead, caged canary with a broken neck. Now, through a structuralist lens, this isn't just a sad random detail, it is literally an intersection of multiple structural binaries. The bird perfectly symbolizes the freedom and oppression binary of Minnie's own life. Furthermore, because the men entirely dismiss the bird as a mere domestic trifle, while the women immediately recognize it as the literal motive for the murder, it perfectly maps that binary of masculine logic versus feminine insight. Why does this matter? Because structuralism essentially demystifies the text. It shows us the mathematical machinery of how it produces its themes, turning what seems like a totally random stage prop into the absolute master key of the entire narrative.
Time for the pivot, Section 4, the post-structuralist turn.
So, we've built this structural house that feels incredibly stable, totally scientific, and perfectly orderly. But I want you to consider this intellectual speed bump from 1970s France. It was an intellectual earthquake that shook this house right down to its foundations. What if the structure simply isn't stable? What if that perfectly neat table of binary oppositions we just discussed is actually just a rigid illusion? This one question signals the radical shift from the certainty and order of structuralism to the absolute ambiguity, complexity, and fluidity of post-structuralism.
Post-structuralism acts as both a continuation of and a profound critique of Saussure's work. Post-structuralists look at systems and just reject their stability entirely. They argue that meaning isn't fixed in a neat structure. It is wildly fluid, dynamic, and constantly shifting. Language is seen as inherently unstable and totally capable of conflicting meanings at the exact same time. Furthermore, they argue language doesn't just passively reflect reality, it actively constructs it. Therefore, there can be absolutely no single, authoritative, stable interpretation of any text. The author and the subject are decentered, constantly being shaped and reshaped by culture and ideology.
Let's meet the thinkers behind this shift in Section 5, Deconstruction, Power, and Authors.
Let's meet the specific architects of this post-structuralist fracture and look at the exciting new tools they provide for your analytical coursework. First up is Jacques Derrida, who pioneered a really famous method called deconstruction. Now, despite how the word sounds, Derrida isn't talking about violently destroying texts. Rather, he's opening them up to uncover their internal contradictions and ambiguities. He introduced this concept of difference, suggesting that meaning relies on an endless chain of differences. Because a word only means something in relation to other words, meaning is constantly deferred and never fully, completely present. It's like looking up a word in a dictionary, right? Only to find it defined by other words, which are then defined by still other words. The true meaning is always pushed further down the line, never fully arriving. You could just never perfectly pin a final meaning down. Next, we have Michel Foucault. Foucault explored how knowledge is never, ever neutral. It is intimately and permanently intertwined with power. He focused a lot on discourse, which are the systems of thought that define what can even be said or known in a given society. For example, he analyzed how medical institutions literally construct what we consider healthy or abnormal, and how legal institutions define what is lawful or criminal. To Foucault, these aren't natural, absolute facts. They are realities constructed by the subtle language in the immense power structures of societal institutions.
And then we arrive at a truly revolutionary stance for literary criticism, Roland Barthes' incredibly famous essay, The Death of the Author. Barthes argued that traditional criticism places way too much importance on the author's intentions or their personal biography. For post-structuralists, once a text is out there in the world, the author no longer holds the ultimate authority over its meaning. The author is quite literally dead in terms of being the final judge of what their own work actually means.
So if the author is dead, who brings the meaning? Well, you do, the active reader. Post-structuralism argues that the reader's own unique context and lived experiences actually create the meaning, making literature a highly dynamic, participatory process. Furthermore, post-structuralists actively dismantle the very binary oppositions we just used to analyze Trifles. They point out that binaries, like male and female or speech and writing, are never neutral pairs. They are constructed, unequal hierarchies. And here is the real core of deconstruction. The supposedly inferior term in the pair is actually completely essential to the meaning of the superior term. By proving this interdependence, they reveal that these hierarchies are totally unstable.
Bringing it all home now with Section 6, The Enduring Legacy.
Let's bring all these highly abstract, fascinating concepts back down to earth and look at their real-world impact on your academic journey today. Structuralism and post-structuralism aren't just opposing theories that cancel each other out. They actually work beautifully together as a complete analytical toolkit. Structuralism gives you the scientific, methodical focus on systems, patterns, and underlying rules to decode exactly how cultural practices are built. Post-structuralism then swoops in and gives you the critical flexibility to embrace fluidity, multiplicity, and ambiguity, allowing you to destabilize those structures and actively challenge authority. Frankly, you need both to truly engage deeply with any text.
Which brings us to our final thought. Given these two incredibly powerful lenses, the framework that meticulously builds meaning and the fracture that relentlessly interrogates it, how will you decode the shifting meanings in your next reading assignment? Because the meaning isn't just sitting there passively on the page, it's actively waiting for you to uncover the rules, question the structures, and participate in creating it. Keep that in mind the next time you open a book for class.